Okay, today we're learning about adding and subtracting rational expressions. The thing about adding and subtracting fractions is that you have to have a common denominator. This may seem a little more tricky when we have algebraic fractions, and so we're going to take a look at those. We'll start with easy. At any point through this lesson, if you want to stop, try the problem, and then hit play to see if you got it right, that would be a good idea. Here I have 4 over 3y plus 7 over 3y. Because they have a common denominator, we can go ahead and add them together. And so 4 plus 7 is 11 over 3y. And I apologize now for my bad handwriting. The second problem, again, in the denominator, we have 3a minus 4 and 3a minus 4. So I can add these together. 2a plus 3a is 5a. And my denominator stays the same, 3a minus 4. Our third problem. This looks a little more complicated, but if I notice, the denominators are the same. 3x squared minus x minus 2, 3x squared minus x minus 2. The difference here is I am subtracting. And so if I'm subtracting, that's the same as adding a negative 4x minus 3. I just distributed that negative. So I have 7x, and I add negative 4x, that's going to give me 3x. And I have 5 plus negative 3, which is going to give me positive 2. The denominator is 3x squared minus x minus 2. Now, you want to check the denominator to make sure that one of its factors isn't 3x plus 2, because if it is, we could cancel. In this case, it is. How did we get that? Well, this denominator, 3 times negative 2 is negative 6. Middle term is negative 1. Two numbers that multiply to be negative 6 and add up to negative 1 are negative 3 and positive 2. So we rewrite the middle term. It becomes 3x squared minus 3x plus 2x minus 2. We cut it in half. We look at the first two terms. We can factor out a 3x. I'm left with x minus 1. The last two terms, I can factor out a 2. I'm left with x minus 1. And so my denominator from my original fraction is common to both is x minus 1. And we have 3x plus 2. The numerator was 3x plus 2. And so we can cancel common factors. 3x plus 2 on top, 3x plus 2 on the bottom. That leaves me with just a 1 in the numerator and an x minus 1 in the denominator. So you have to be careful. Sometimes you can factor that denominator so you can cancel common factors. Here's another one. both have the same denominator. That's a good thing. We go ahead, this is subtraction. I'm going to change subtraction to addition and change this to negative 6q and positive 5. Now I'm going to go ahead and combine. 7q plus negative 6q is positive 1q. Negative 3 plus positive 5 is positive 2. Now the denominator is going to stay q squared minus 4. However, I notice this is the difference of two perfect squares. And so I'm going to go ahead and factor it to make it q plus 2 times q minus 2. Again, I apologize for my handwriting. Now I have a q plus 2 on top and a q plus 2 on bottom. They are common factors, and so my final answer is just a 1 on top and a q minus 2 on the bottom. And so 1 over q minus 2. Now sometimes we don't have common denominators, and so you have to think of what's the common denominator. In this case, if I look at the 6 and the 2, the common denominator would be the 6. I have an x and x squared. The common denominator would be x squared. So 6x squared is the common denominator. So I look at the first fraction. What do I have to multiply 6x by to get 6x squared? The answer is x. So I'm going to multiply the top and the bottom by x. And what do I multiply 2x squared by to get 6x squared? And the answer is 3. So I multiply the numerator and the denominator by 3. When I do that, the numerator here becomes 5x over 6x squared plus, over here the numerator becomes 9 over 6x squared combine the two numerators because I now have a common denominator. I get 5x plus 9 in the numerator and the denominator remains 6x squared. Here's another one. What's the common denominator? Well, I look at the numbers 7 and 3. The common denominator for 7 and 3 would be 21. I have y to the 4th and y squared. The common denominator would be y to the 4th. So, the first fraction, to get the denominator equal to 21 y to the 4th, I'm going to have to multiply by 3. Okay, on the top, in order to get 3y squared to 21y to the 4th, I have to multiply by y squared. 7y squared, sorry about that. And so, multiply this side, I get 9 over 21y to the 4th. That's a 4. Plus, on this side, I get 14y squared over 21y to the 4th. Now I combine numerators because I have common denominators. You can't add these, they're not like terms. I'm going to go ahead and put it in the correct order. 14y squared plus 9 in the numerator and 21y to the 4th in the denominator. Now, sometimes it's a little more complicated. And so, first of all, I'm going to change, again, I have subtraction. I'm going to change this to addition and make this a -2. Now, remember, this denominator is just d minus 1, and this denominator is d plus 2. So the common denominator is just going to be d minus 1 over, or times, sorry, d plus 2. That is the common denominator. So, if I want to make these the same, this denominator needs to be multiplied by d plus 2. And so does the numerator. This denominator on this side needs to be multiplied by d minus 1. And so does this numerator. So let's look over here. If I take the 3 and distribute it to these two terms in this binomial, I get 3d plus 6 over d minus 1 times d plus 2. In the other side, the other fraction, I distribute the -2. I get -2d plus 2 over my common denominator, d minus 1 times d plus 2. So now I can combine the numerators. So I have 3d, and I'm adding -2d. That gives me positive 1d. 6 plus 2 gives me 8. My denominator is the common denominator, d minus 1 times d plus 2. And that's all I have to do. You do not have to redistribute these two. You can leave it just the way it is. All right, let's do one more and then we're done. Same thing. You need a common denominator. The common denominator is just 3c minus 1 times c minus 2. We're just going to multiply those. So that is going to be the common denominator. 3c minus 1 times c minus 2. Now, before I do anything else, I'm going to make this subtraction addition and carry the negative through the numerator. So it's just -4. That just makes it so much easier and leaves less room for error. So on this side, I'm going to multiply both the top, the numerator, and the bottom, the denominator, by the part that's missing, the c minus 2. I'm going to multiply it to the top and the bottom. And on this side, I have to multiply the numerator and denominator by the part that's missing, 3c minus 1. I have to multiply it by the numerator and the denominator. So, on this side, if I take c times c, I get c squared. If I take c times -2, I get -2c. and my denominator is the common denominator. On the other side, the other fraction, I take negative 4 times 3c, and I get negative 12c. And I do the negative 4 times the negative 1, I get positive 4. And my common denominator is the denominator. And now when I combine these numerators, because I have a common denominator, I have c squared minus 14c plus 4 all over 3c minus 1 times c minus 2. Now the question is, does this numerator factor into one of those terms? So let's think about it. Two numbers that multiply to be 4 that add up to negative 14. Hopefully you realize fairly quickly that that's not factorable. And so my final answer is c squared minus 14c plus 4 over the quantity 3c minus 1 times the quantity c minus 2. And that is a lesson 11-4.